And we are live. This is day 2, Introduction to Web Development, specifically HTML. So the first thing I want to talk about today is a little bit about my lesson style. Now, if you're people who see this on Twitch or YouTube, I actually have my face cam on. So hello everybody. You can see the pubes growing on my face. But that's not important right now. Let's just get to it. Oh yeah, I forgot to share my screen. I gotta share my screen with you guys. That would be helpful. I mean, that's not gonna be shared here because it's Discord, so I can't really share that screen. But I will share the screen that you guys do need to see. It's twitch.tv/dynamicfix. But anyway, so today, like, we're going to be going over quite a few things here. I'm gonna pull up the Discord here so it's on screen as I'm reading through. But the main thing here is I think that's very, like, my teaching style is not like, I'm not going to go over like, oh, this is all the different ways you can do this. This is all the different ways you can do that. It's not important for you to understand all the different ways that something can be done. I'm gonna focus specifically on what I feel is important for you guys to know as far as like fundamentals, right? So I'm gonna break down exactly how something works and why, and that will allow you to kind of like, because that fundamental knowledge trumps anything. Like, it's not about remembering, oh, I can copy and paste this code and this works because it works there, so it's gonna work here. You know, like, there are, like, you know, what we call copy and paste programmers, who are people who can just take a working example somewhere and then just make enough changes to it so that it works for what they need to do. And that's like a great strategy when you're starting out. But if you don't ultimately understand the reason why things are done the way they are, then you're never going to be able to actually like create something from scratch, or like take, you know, a concept that you have an idea for and just use your programming understanding to develop it. Like, you're going to need to get to a point where you fully understand why things are the way they are. So what you guys see on screen here right now is we're talking about different kinds of brackets, and this is going to come up. You're going to see this in just about every bit of programming that you do. You're going to deal with like what I want to call, even though this is not the proper terminology for it, but since you guys are mostly all non-developers, I'm gonna, maybe the word pointer will help you understand this a little better. Brackets are meant to basically tell the code parser where something begins and where it ends. And an HTML, like, we're gonna talk a lot about that in particularly. That's one of the big things we'll get into when I start putting some code on the screen and kind of explaining everything to you guys. But this little screen that I have here, important to understand the difference. So angle brackets, this is what it looks like. So if you hear me say angle brackets, this is what I'm talking about. It might take a lot of repetition for it to kind of like clear up if you're not used to seeing it. If you're not used to seeing it, you look at this as a less than or greater to sign, and that's, again, it does come up in programming as part of as greater to or less than or greater to signs if you're dealing with mathematical operations in programming. But like, from an opening and closing, it's angle brackets. And I think that you guys can understand that the one that points to the left is the opening one, the one that points to the right is the closing one. Just kind of like imagine as, you know, something is closed within those brackets. Like, it's the best way to think about it. That way you don't have to really think about which one is open, which one is closed. Whatever's inside of it is like fits inside of it, if that makes sense. Square brackets.
Like a parenthesis.
Yeah, so parentheses is actually, I didn't put parentheses on this list because I feel like parentheses are obvious enough. But there is parentheses as well in programming, like with function parameters, etc. We'll get into all that later on, like not in this lesson, but parentheses is basically a good example. And then there's the squiggly brackets or curly brackets. I usually call it squiggly brackets. Some people call it curly brackets. The reality is, it doesn't matter what you call it. You type it, you write it. You know what it is in your head. You know, like, I don't, like it's not something that you're going to be talking about a lot. Like, you know, once you get the hang of it, you don't really find yourself mentioning squiggly brackets or curly brackets, because you'll be saying things like, oh, this is an if statement, and you know, you're the person you're talking to typically will already know, you know, where the opening bracket and the closing bracket is for the statement that you're talking about. So it's not something that comes up in programming language, like verbal language, too much. But you know, because I am going to be explaining things, if I'm saying squiggly bracket or curly bracket, this is what I'm talking about. And we'll go back to this like throughout different lessons. I'm going to save this image and we'll kind of come back to this a couple of times, because it's just important for you guys to understand that. And now, before we kind of start getting into showing you guys some code, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between programming language and verbal language. I think that's a good... Say that again? Oh, okay. So that's something that's kind of important to understand. If you're not a programmer, a lot of people, they tend to think of programming as like, oh, it's the same thing as learning how to speak Chinese or learning how to speak a different language. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's not at all like speaking a different language. You're not talking to the computer like the computer has any kind of a human understanding, because it doesn't. A computer has computer understanding. So the best way to think about it, and if you're like, you know, if your basic algebra is going to come into play a lot in programming, like basic algebra covers a lot of how, you know, we use variables and plug variables in a bunch of different places in programming. But the main thing to think about this is like you are basically giving the computer a set of instructions. That's the best way to think about it. It's a set of instructions. So think about a to-do list that you might make for yourself. If you're trying to keep that to-do list as clear and as specific and explicit as possible, you know, and explicit is the key word there, you might say something like, so say like you have a couple of chores to do in the morning. It'll be like, get off from bed, walk to this room, do this, then do that, then do that. If this is like this, then do this. If not, then do that. So that is basically, like, if you think about it from a verbal communication perspective, that is how programming works. You're always going to be giving your code parser, and this is regardless of what language you're coding in, a set of instructions. Now, this kind of lets me segue a little bit about performance. What's the difference between good code and bad code? If the code works, then it's good code, right? No, wrong. Good code is not code that just works. Good code is also code that performs better. So when you're thinking about the set of instructions, you also want to think about what set of instructions is the minimal instructions that it takes to get from point A to point B, or to accomplish your goals. Because the more instructions you give a code parser, then the longer it takes to run through all of those instructions, and the shittier your code is, you know, basically. So, and, you know, down the road we'll talk more about that, but I think this is good enough of an introduction as far as like how you should think about programming when we're coming into this. Now today we're going to talk about just HTML. So like, you know, HTML, as I mentioned, I think I said this to you guys. Maybe I didn't say it on the first session, so I'll say it on air, so this is recorded. HTML is not a programming language. It's not. Some people consider it a programming language. It is not a programming language. It's technically programming, but it's a markup language, and you'll understand that more and more as we go. But I'll kind of explain some rules of how HTML works. And it's actually a lot more simple than most people think. HTML is like super, super basic. And I have no doubt that by the time we end this session today, if you didn't have a clear understanding of how HTML works, like, you know, going into this, you'll come out of it having a good understanding of it. So the next thing that we're going to talk about here is, okay, so as we're talking about human legible, right, formatting, we're going to talk about styling. So let me actually go ahead and actually show you. Ignore everything you're seeing on screen. This is not, I'm just going to make a brand new file here. And I'm going to just make it an HTML file. I'm just going to call it, I'll do whatever. I'll put it on my URL so you think it doesn't matter for now. But this is just going to call demo.html. You don't have to worry too much about this. Now, by default, most IDEs, and IDE is like the environment that you use to program, when you create a new file, like a new HTML file, it'll kind of give you like a basic structure of the file automatically. For the sake of today, we're not going to worry about that. Like, so that when it does happen, you guys know what you're looking at. But for today, because this is kind of like a brand new from scratch introduction to HTML, we're not going to look at any of that. Now, if anybody on the call, go ahead.
What's the difference between a HTML5 and 4 file?
There's no difference in the file. HTML is HTML. There's no such thing as .html5. But HTML5 is just newer HTML syntax and more things you can do with HTML. I want you to, for the sake of today and going forward, think of HTML5 as just HTML, because nobody really uses like the old classic HTML anymore. Everything you're going to be doing is going to be HTML5, because every browser is capable of reading HTML5. So don't really try to, I know that kind of complicating things a little bit, but that's the big difference. The HTML5 10 years ago, or probably less than that, was new, and not every browser supported it, so you have to be careful. Like, if you're going to implement something with HTML5, you need to make sure that the clients using it are not going to be using older browsers. If you did, you needed to make sure you have an alternative and all that. Everything supports HTML5 basically these days, so it's not really something you need to worry about too much. Like, I'm not going to show you old ways of doing things when I can show you the HTML5 approach, especially when it comes to vanilla JavaScript, ES6, and all that. I know you guys don't know what that means yet, but you will soon. But anyway, so moving on, right? In HTML, you're going to see a lot of angle brackets. A lot, like the open and close brackets. In HTML, every angle bracket that you see is an element, and the name of that element, so get familiar with the terminology of HTML element. It's gonna, and right now I'm not gonna use real elements, right? Because technically an HTML element could be anything. So I can literally say banana, and this is like my banana tag. Now in HTML, so by writing this in HTML, I've created a banana element. Now, in order to close that banana element, I need to make another tag, but it's going to be /banana, right? So this is the opening element, and this is the close of the element. But to basically tell like, you know, your browser what element you're trying to use, you're opening and closing. Everybody can read this, right? I can zoom in if this is like hard to, and you know, I'm gonna zoom in anyway.
Can you?
Yeah, I should be able to. Yeah, I think I actually have to. Just give me a second here. I gotta actually update. I'll make it a little bigger so it's easier for everybody to see what I'm typing and what I'm doing. Just a sec. I'm trying to remember. I haven't changed the font size in a while on Netbeans. I think it would be. I think appearance, looking, you know, note, document tabs, fonts and colors. There we go. So we're gonna go for font size 24. Apply. All right, is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So we're opening element, closing element, right? Now, another key distinction here is not every HTML element needs to be closed. You only need to close an element if the element is going to have content inside of it. That doesn't mean that if you want to have an empty element, you can't have it empty. Like say we didn't want any content inside of banana, if banana is the kind of element that needs to be closed, you'll still need to provide the close. And I know that sounds a little complicated right now. What the fuck does banana mean? Really, it means whatever you want it to mean when you make an HTML element with banana, but HTML has already predefined elements that you use for certain things. So we're not gonna be making up elements, although you can make up an element in HTML and style it however you want and make it do whatever you want. We're not going to be making anything up. You kind of don't need to with HTML. Nobody really does. In HTML development, you're always going to be using a list of elements that already exist. So just for reference, I just want to very quickly pull up. Let me open up a new Chrome window here. I just want to pull up HTML elements. If you Google this, the very first result is going to be W3 Schools. That's like one of the most popular reference websites that you can use for HTML, CSS, a whole bunch of, you know, web-based related languages that you can see here. And here, if you go to HTML elements, you will see a list of all the different, like, you know, if you go through this, you can see, like, you know, all different HTML elements that you can use for different things. We're only going to focus on a few. We're only going to focus on a few that matter, a few that you'll be using, and I'm going to talk about how you can make that element look however you want it to look, right? But every HTML document needs to have a structure, and that structure always starts with HTML. So the main HTML element that needs to wrap your whole entire HTML document is literally HTML, and that's from top to bottom. That's how it goes. Now notice that when I press enter, my IDE that I use automatically indents this for me, which it creates some spaces or a tab forward. That's another conversation. I'll actually get into this in a little bit. Now, inside of an HTML document, you have your head and you have your body. And I'll explain the difference very briefly. Right? So you have your head and your body. Now, your head is metadata. Metadata in applications in general usually means information about your application that is meant for statistical purposes. Like, so say for example, if I pull up HTML elements here, you look at the title of the tab, right? It says HTML elements, although the body of the page is everything that you see on the actual page. But anything that's like a description of the page, so say for example, if you go to google.com and you look up W3 schools, I typed that wrong, but all this information that's here, right? You're not on the actual website, you're on Google. So here it has the title, it has the description, you know, it has some tags, and like if I go here and look at the source, I can actually show you what I'm talking about. All of this is defined within the head. So the title, you know, keywords, description, and these are like resource files, which we'll get into in the future. All of this stuff goes within the head. It's not something that you will see visually in your document. Like, you know, you don't see that in here, like where you start, where the page begins. From top to bottom, from the very top left of the page here where my mouse is, if you guys can see it, all the way to the bottom of this page, everything that you visually see is going to be inside of your body tag. So you don't have to worry too much about what goes in your head for now. Just if you give the page a title, we're going to call, well, not time. If you give your page a title, we're going to call this intro to HTML, right? And in the body, I'm just going to type your standard new application, which is hello world. Now I'm going to save this file. I'm going to put it on my desktop so that's easy to get to. So demo.html, right? So I saved this file. And now you can test this file with any browser that you have. So I can literally just go on Chrome here, open up where I have my file on my desktop, and go ahead and just open that with Chrome. There's my file, hello world. And as you can see in the title here, it says intro to HTML because I put that title on the head. And if you right click and go to view page source, this is basically what we just created. So essentially Chrome is just rendering the file that you saved, right? Now, before I keep going, does anybody have any questions so far about any of these very brief little things that I just described? No. Good. All right.
Oh, I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Short definition of a body.
Short definition of a body. So the body is basically the visual rendering of everything in your HTML document. It goes inside of the body.
That's all I need.
Where did banana go?
I removed it.
So what was that? Was that just an example of an element?
Yeah, that was an example of an
Right,
element, because an element, just so the structure of an element, just to kind of clear up here. So the structure of an element is always going to be open tag, the name of the element. I use banana as an example, so like name of my element, and then close tag. That's the opening tag. And then the close tag is the same exact thing. The only difference is your close tag is going to have a / that comes right before or right after your opening tag. So anything in between is content inside of that tag. So looking at this example, everything inside of my title, like my title is Intro to HTML. This tells, you know, the browser where my title begins. This tells the browser where my title ends. And like most IDEs will kind of like when you click on something, it'll highlight. Like, so if I click on the end of head, it'll highlight the beginning for me automatically. Now, we're going to segue a little bit out of the we'll resume here in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about IDE and tools for development and scopes. This is not a targeting you, okay? You and I have had this conversation offline, so we can continue to have discussions about it offline. But as far as like, so coding environment, there are tons and tons and tons of different software that you can use to like write code in. Back in the day, like I actually used Notepad just because I thought it was cool to use Notepad because Notepad did nothing for me. Not a good idea. Like I was really young. Not a good idea at all. You definitely want to use an IDE that has syntax highlighting, that you can kind of see what you're doing. An IDE that somewhat helps you and guides you and shows you like obvious errors that you can miss. Like say for example, I do this body here and I go and continue my page and I never close it. You know, you're gonna get some errors like when you try to run this and debug it. You're like in JavaScript specifically, you're gonna get a lot of errors if there's like syntax errors, something that's obviously wrong with your code. You know, your IDE will kind of guide you a little bit and tell. And like here, like when you start a tag, it gives you a list of a whole bunch of like common HTML tags that you can put in. I don't ever really use this, you know, but it's there, you know, and a lot of different IDEs will do that. Now, as far as recommendation, I use Netbeans. Netbeans is free. It is not the most popular one out there. What was that?
Spell it.
Netbeans. Sure, I'll actually go ahead and post a link. So I mean Netbeans, but well, I think it's .org or .net, one of those. Yeah, netbeans.apache.org. I'll go ahead and post that link in our discussions channel so you guys can download it later. I will say, you know, that there's also Visual Studio Code is like probably the most popular one these days. I have tried to use it. My personal opinion is it is not better than Netbeans. It looks better than Netbeans as like visually. It looks nicer, but as far as like capabilities and what you can do with VS Code, because VS Code is like usually built by like people's third-party plugins, which there's pros and cons to that. But even the best plugins, me trying to like get my VS Code to do the things that Netbeans does for me automatically, or things that Netbeans does that helps me a ton, was not worth it. I spent like a better part of a couple of months trying to get VS Code to do everything just because it was newer, and I figured maybe I'm slacking behind. But then after so many issues, I decided, you know what, it's not really worth it. Netbeans already does all this shit. I don't know why I'm wasting my time trying to use something just because it's newer, you know. And I've used many other IDEs before Netbeans as well that I always will prefer Netbeans over for many different reasons. I'm not going to get into the reasons why today. Maybe as we go along, like, you know, every time that I see that Netbeans, you can use Netbeans to do something a little easier, which there's going to be plenty of those, I'll go ahead and show you some Netbeans specific functionality. Another reason why I recommend you guys using Netbeans instead of anything else is because if you run into issues with anything, I use Netbeans every single day. I can help you figure that out. You know, it's like if you're using an IDE I'm not familiar with, I might not be able to help you, like, you know, figure out whatever is happening like with your environment, because your environment is important. You're going to be using Netbeans not for just HTML, but you'll be using Netbeans or whatever IDE you choose for HTML, JavaScript, CSS, etc. So anyway, so that kind of wraps up that IDE conversation, I hope. And then when we go down, let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. All right, so another very, very useful tool that you want to get while we're talking tools, it's actually super, super, super useful. It's called Ditto, D-I-T-T-O. I'll paste a link for that as well. It's a clipboard manager. I'll explain what that means in a second. so this is the link for it right here. Get Ditto Clipboard, Microsoft.com. So you can get it from the Microsoft App Store. So that's fine, but I'll go ahead and paste that link there. So if you just look it up on your Microsoft Store, you'll find that as well. What Ditto is, it's basically a clipboard manager. So say like you copy this, right, and you're going to use it for something, but then you need to copy something else, whatever. Like obviously your clipboard is always going to be the last thing that you copied, but a clipboard manager allows you to like just look at the history of the things that you have copied. So if I want to go back to the last thing I copied, there it is. And in programming, copy and pasting is going to happen a lot. Anytime that you can copy and paste something, do it. Do not trust yourself to write it correctly every single time. Don't worry so much about like, oh, the more I write it, the more I remember it. No, like if you know what you're pasting, like, obviously you're not trying to paste like giant snippets of code that you don't understand, but anytime that you're especially when it comes to variable names and you're coding in JavaScript, copy and paste it. There's like a lot of shortcuts, like you double click on something, it'll automatically highlight the whole thing. And I'll go over a lot of that as we go, how I tend to do things, but copy and paste is your best friend, and Ditto is also your best friend when it comes to that, because you like anything like that's like you can configure how long you want that history to be within Ditto itself. I don't ever mess with that. I always just use the default. The shortcut key that I'm using for it here, which I believe is also default, is you hold Control and press tick, and then it just shows you like the list of things. And you can actually just press the number of the thing that's like you can faintly see it here on my screen, but everything is numbered. So you can also just press the number to go to the thing that you had on your clipboard, and then it becomes like the top thing on your clipboard. So as you can imagine, when you're when you're copying and pasting a lot of things around, a clipboard manager goes a really, really long way. So you don't have to like, oh, I have to copy this, but then oh, if I copy this, I'm going to lose this, so let me open a notepad and paste that there. You don't have to worry about doing things like that. So okay, so what is your question, Scopes?
Do we still get, is like recommended over the built-in clipboard manager in Windows 10?
I don't use the regular clipboard manager in Windows 10. I've been using Ditto since before Windows 10 was ever a thing. So I don't know. I'm familiar with it. It's easy enough for me. It makes pasting
it's Windows
things.
V, but you can't search and all that stuff you mentioned.
Yeah. Then I mean, I think you just answered your own question. Yep. I definitely would recommend still getting it then.
Searching would make it easier for code, I imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because like sometimes it could be like sometimes I'm looking for something that I copied like a couple of days ago. I'm not gonna find that if I can't search. You know what I mean? But anyway, so now moving on to indentation. This is kind of going back to the beginning of this session here when I was talking about like how you want to write, like how we interpret like language as human being, how we should think about programming. Indentation is literally for humans. This is for you to better understand what you're looking at. Like, so by having heads start a tab away from HTML, like you could very clearly and visually see, like you can tell that all of this is inside of HTML because everything starts on this line. And if it starts on this line, everything is inside of the things that start on this line, and so on and so forth. And indentation doesn't just pertain to HTML. I'll open up a JavaScript file so you can see indentation pertains to just about everything. This is JavaScript code. I'll show you some CSS code. 1 second. This is SCSS, but it's technically just CSS. You know, there's indentation for just about everything, right? So this is how I am able to very easily know what I'm looking at first glance. The way that the parser reads it, though, it doesn't care about how many spaces or line breaks or anything you put in your code. Your parser will read your code like this, always. You know, anytime that, like, so the parser will kind of condense everything into like a single line. It doesn't care about any of that, you know, but because so this kind of, so obviously when you're looking at it like this as a human, it's a lot more difficult to understand what's going on, especially when, if you can imagine, this is like nothing really. All we just have is a title and a body. So imagine you actually have like a full web page, like you're never gonna be able to really like do much or understand what you're working with if everything is just one single line with no line breaks, no indentation or anything like that. But this is also why it's important to understand how tags work. When the code's reading it, it reads open HTML, and then it reads open head, it reads open title. So like think about it, like now there are 3 things open. Now it's writing the title inside of the head, inside of the HTML. And only when you close the title, like, okay, so the title is closed, but we're still in the head. And if you do anything else inside of head, it knows you're still in the head until you close the head. Now it knows that you're still in HTML. And then you open a body, now it knows you're inside of the body, and so on and so forth. And that is how your code parser is going to be able to understand what you're doing, which is why the opening and closing pointers are super important. But indentation is just as important. Now, for the people who struggle, because not everybody likes, there are people who are very, very anal and tidy about keeping their code super clean and organized. I'm one of those. There are people who don't give a shit. There are people who will have like a bunch of different spaces and lines, and that there's really no rhyme or reason to it. Maybe they'll put like 4 indentations here and only like 1 indentation here. In the end of the day, it's going to be functional. It still works, but it's messy code. It's difficult to read, and if you're working with a teammate and you're sharing that code, if you don't keep things consistent, it's very difficult for them to keep up. So that's where we get into the subject of tabs versus spaces. This is actually a real debate in the programming world. What's better to use, tabs or spaces? A tab, now different IDEs will consider tabs different.
Silicon Valley.
Right, yes. This is something that came up in Silicon Valley. So I have my IDE configured where 1 tab is equal to 4 spaces. And that's the standard in the indentation. The standard is 4 spaces. Some people do 2 spaces, and you have like a little tighter code. I like 4 spaces because 4 spaces kind of stands it out. It's one of those things that, in the end of the day, it's personal preference. Like, there's no right or wrong. There's spaces are right, tabs are wrong, spaces are right, 2 spaces are right, 4 spaces. There's no such thing. That's all preference in the end of the day. And Netbeans has an auto format tool here, which automatically formats my indentation for me. That's one of the features, right? So you highlight everything, you do Control-Alt-F. I think that's the default hotkey. Everything automatically re-indents itself to how it's supposed to be. So if I had the indentation all screwed up, I can fix it just like that. Just by Control-H, select all, Control-Alt-F, bam, auto-formatted. So tools will help you with that if you're not very good at remembering that. But then as far as all these extra lines, it's not going to help you with that. But rule of thumb with line breaks is you probably, unless, if your code starts in a new line, 1 line is all you need. There is no need. I know that some people are oh, this is nice and separated because there's a nice line break in between each. Is it really that much different than just having it like that? I mean, the indentation kind of does the work for you here. You can see where things are. You don't need extra line breaks, but some people like extra line breaks, and in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Now, for JavaScript, there are a couple of things that you'll use once we get way further down the road that can automatically make decisions, go in through your code and fix things for you. It'll fix indentation, it'll add a semicolon to the end of all your lines if you're missing it. We're not going to get into that. I don't want to complicate things because that's JavaScript, but there are things to help you if you feel code styling, which is, again, for humans, is a difficult thing to remember and a difficult thing to grasp. There are tools out there that make it a little easier. IDEs like Netbeans does that. Most IDEs will, but that's another thing to consider there. Now let me go back to my notes. I know that kind of covers a lot of the early things I wanted to go over with, and we can kind of resume with HTML. Okay, so now HTML is not all about just elements. And then now we're going to kind of go back to the banana example. And I'm going to actually push this down a little bit, and we're going to go back to the banana example. And every time we're saying the banana tag, just think about this. This is a generic tag. It can be anything. That's why I'm using the word banana, because banana really doesn't have place in HTML, but this could literally be any kind of tag. Tags have attributes, and understanding the syntax for that attributes is very important. If you don't know what syntax means, well, you're going to hear it a lot. But syntax is basically the way things are written, right? That's the syntax. So if you're not writing it correctly, you have what's called a syntax error. So let me give you an example. So an attribute for an element will go after the element. So I can actually give this styling attributes, and this gets into the little bit of the conversation of HTML5 and different versions, but there's a lot of attributes in HTML that you will never see in your life, and if you're seeing them, you're looking at what we call bad practice, because although it works and although you can do it, doesn't really mean that you should do it, right? So back before CSS was very popular and before CSS was a thing, if you wanted to give your element a width and a height on the page, your attributes were width, and then you have to say equals, and notice how it automatically put those double quotes for me. Double quotes is standard in HTML. You can use single quotes, but don't. It is bad practice. Is like try to keep everything double quotes. If you're in an HTML file, every string you're using, make sure it's double quotes. Every property you're assigning, make sure it's double quotes. So say we wanted this div to be 500. Now what does this 500 mean? It means pixels, right? So I'm hoping everybody here knows what pixels on screen is. If you don't, we're gonna move forward, but just think about your resolution. It's how much space from your resolution it'll take up on your screen. And yes, this will look different in different monitor sizes, etc., but we're not going to talk about that. That's more of a styling conversation. We're not going to talk about that. But so this width is an attribute, right? So this is the banana HTML element, and it has an attribute called width, and the value of that attribute is 500. Does that make sense? It's a very simple breakdown, right? And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this again. So element is the name here, and then attribute is what goes afterwards, and then value is what goes inside of the parentheses. This is the generic way of understanding every single HTML element you will ever look at anywhere. And we can go and look at an example. So let's look at this W3 schools page again. This is not it, but whatever. Let's just look at this code here, right? So here is an HTML element. Char set is an attribute. UTF-8 is the value. Meta is the HTML element. Name is an attribute. Viewport's the value. And there is no limit to how many attributes a HTML element can have. So you can have attribute 2 equals value 2, and so on and so forth. I could keep going. Now what's important, there's got to be at least one space in between each attribute, because if you do this, now it thinks your element is called element attribute. You need the space for it to know that this is the element and this is the attribute. There's no space variation here. This works, but you don't want to add spaces where you don't need them. Although that there's nothing quote unquote wrong with this code, styling is like, although this will still work, you want to kind of keep the equals and the value all together, so all the attributes are kind of like all touching each other. There's no spaces in between. Your spaces are just between the element and each attribute, if that makes sense, right? And this is where things get a little complicated too, because this is correct syntax, but it's by definition bad practice, because it becomes harder to read something when you're adding things you don't necessarily need to add. So try to keep that in mind. Like, you're always going to have another thing you can do that's also not bad, like it's bad practice, but it's also correct syntax, is if I added a whole bunch of spaces in between attributes. Again, this might look easier to read, but really only to the untrained eye. I mean, this is nobody can argue that this is not easier to read. Everything is spaced out. It makes it much easier at first glance to see that this attribute is separate. But again, you don't want to add more spaces than you need to. You want to kind of keep it concise, and just keep it one space in between. eventually, I know that all of this is brand new to you guys, but once you've looked at HTML enough, there's really not much to it. And now for the shocking surprise, that's literally it. That's all there is to HTML. HTML is elements, and elements have properties. Different properties mean different things, and different properties do different things. But in a nutshell, fundamentally, that is what HTML is, aka markup. All it is just basically telling the browser or the client how something needs to look, which element goes where, right? And this is like very minimal styling. So let's just go back to our example, So this is our HTML, this is our head, this is our body. So now we're going to talk about some common HTML tags that you guys are going to use literally in almost any programming thing that you're going to do. Just reading something in the comment. No, I do not want to be famous. But anyway, so we're going to read something. What was I saying? So we're going to go with table. Table is a commonly used HTML element. People use tables for just about everything. And just so we can visually see this table a little better, I'm going to give it a border of 1, right? So border is the property. And you can, if you're curious in what kind of properties does an HTML element have, it takes experience to be able to memorize this stuff and know it off the top of your head, obviously. But you can always just look it up. Anytime that you're trying to do something, if you've seen something done online, right? So say you're trying to do something, you have more or less an idea of what it looks like. You can try to find an example of it on any web page, and then you can use your inspector to look at what kind. And let me y'all, it's over here. You can go ahead and inspect it like this, or you can actually just right click on whatever you're trying to do. So let's right click on this button here. And yeah, there you go, and inspect. And this is, as we see here, so this button is an anchor tag, is what it's called, which the element is just the A. Href is where it's going. So href is, again, attribute. And then class is also an attribute. And we're not going to talk about classes today, but we're going to get into that into another lesson. And then this is the context. So inside of this button it says learn JavaScript. So it's just an anchor tag element. Does that make sense? I kind of want a roundtable response from everybody. Does that clear up a lot of what you're looking at here as far as what everything actually means now when you can kind of break down element, attribute, value? Yes or no? Yes. Yep. Yep. Good. Perfect. That's what I was looking for. Didn't get an answer from John or my wife, but I'm assuming it's yeses there as well, right? So that is literally all HTML is. So when I say that HTML is super easy, it's because it is. That's all. As far as syntax goes, everything that we just went over is literally the only fundamental things you need to know. And I know I've said that already, so it does bear repeating though. But so let me finish the table, right? So when you're looking at a table, it's literally what you're thinking. It's kind of think about an Excel sheet, right? You have your rows and you have your columns. So in HTML, you're not going to say, oh, my table has this many rows and this many columns. The way it works is there's elements for tr. Let me leave that as 1. So you have your elements you have this element called tr. It literally means table row. I wish that it was just row instead, but it's not. It's tr. Table row is what it stands for. So when you add a tr element, you've created a row. I hope you guys know the difference between a row and a column. This could be very confusing to people who don't, but you'll kind of get the grasp of it over time. But a row is a horizontal row, right? That's what a row is. And then a column is going to be vertical. And then a column is TD. And this actually means table data. And when you add something, so I'm just going to add example, and I'm going to save this file. Now that I've saved this file, I can actually go on Chrome where I had it open over here and refresh, and there's my table. So my table is just a single style table because I have 1 row and 1 column. So if you want to add more columns, I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple of times. There is all my columns. Make sense? And if you want to add rows, then you actually need new TDs. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to actually copy this whole entire TD from here to here and just paste that, right? Now, here's a little trick. And this is like one of those little basic things. Like, I could do that very quickly and notice that I didn't have to fix any indentation at all. So when I'm copying something, and this will work for every single language, it's just a matter of like, it's a copy and pasting habit for indentation, right? And certain IDEs have shortcuts for you to do that, but you really don't have to if you know the trick. Is if you want to keep your indentation perfect, right? So this is the element I want to copy, the row. If your indentation is already correct, it only works if it's already correct. You start copying from the end of what you want to copy, but then you copy all the way up until the end of the line before, right? And the reason why you do this is because when you paste from here, you're pasting the line break, the indentation, and the beginning underneath, which is what you want. So when you paste that here, you got the line break, the beginning, and the end. And like, I literally just Control C, and I'll just Control V over this once. I'm copying and pasting the same thing, and then for as many times as I want it. And there's going to be a lot of times where you need to do this in programming. You created a structure, now you need to go ahead and change, like, so say for example, if I wanted to, like, just for kind of give you like a real world example, I don't want to have to like write TD example 2. I don't want to have to do this. If I'm trying to list 10 examples and number them all, it's going to be very tedious to write them each individually. So instead, I'm going to shift up, gives you what I was discussing, right? You shift up on your keyboard, you copy it from end to beginning, and then Control V. We're going to do 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now you can just go and use your arrow keys to very quickly do that example, and there you go. And then if you think about it, just a different approach, and there's something wrong here. I don't know. I must have fucked it up somewhere. But little shortcuts like that, and it takes experience. It takes a lot of trial and error to kind of get used to. The faster way you do things, the more time you kind of save. Now, what happens if a column doesn't have the same amount of rows, right? So for this one, I'm going to put 3. Rows doesn't have the same amount of columns, right? So for this one I'm going to put 2, for this one I'm going to put 3. That's essentially what happens. Now you can give properties. So I'm actually going to better remove one from here to make it simple, right? So the first row has 4 columns, second one has 2, third one has 3. If I want this example 3 to take up 2 columns instead of just 1, then the property for TD is called call span. It basically means how much column space do we span, and if you give it the value of 2, now technically this table data counts as 2 columns, so it'll go ahead and you can see that the border went all the way to the end. It takes up all that space. So if you want to even out this one to take up 2 and this one to take up 2, actually let's make the first one take up 3 and the last one we just leave it alone. You can say call span 3, and that's basic beginnings of how a table works. Now typically HTML tables will not have an ugly border like that. You usually won't see it. And styling specifically, like, you know, is not, we don't really style things with HTML anymore. We style everything with CSS. So I'm not going to go over HTML styling attributes because it's not important. The only attribute that I am going to go over is the style attribute, because the style attribute is actually CSS code. Everything you write inside of this style attribute is going to be CSS code. And if you want to look at, we're going to actually touch based on CSS on the next lesson. So I'm not going to go, yeah, it's the next lesson. So I'm not going to go over it into a lot of detail. I'll just go ahead and do like 2 random ones. I do background color red. That's the CSS property. That's how you write CSS. The syntax for CSS is a little different, but again, we'll go over that on the next lesson. And I'm going to make the width like 400 pixels, and I'm going to make the height like 200 pixels. Now my table has a ugly red background and is spaced out. If I want this to take up 100% of the screen, I can say 100%. And if I want it to take 100% of the height, I can also say 100%. And there you go. Now we have a full-size table, and this is technically styled in CSS. although the style tag is not something you want to use. You know, I know, like, I don't want to confuse you guys. I used it here to show you guys what it is and what it means, but typically if you're gonna style something, you want to use actual CSS, right? And with CSS, and again, we're not going to get deep into CSS, we'll explain this later, but I can style this table, and I just wanted to show you how you can literally copy and paste the code from the style tag and put it over here. And we want to actually break this into new lines. This is like proper CSS syntax. So now we have that open squiggly, and we have the indentation, and all our properties are there for our table. We can remove the style tag, we don't need it anymore, and everything is the same. I'm refreshing, you know, that's because now it's because of this, that this is working the way it works. If I get rid of that, it goes back to our naked example that doesn't have anything in it. Hoping that kind of makes sense. Let's go over some other HTML attributes, or I'm sorry, HTML elements that are very commonly used. So you have a div. A div is basically just a container that you put information inside. You're gonna use divs a lot, you know, and with divs it's kind of like the same concept. You can style them to whatever size, whatever width you want. So as you can imagine, I could show you an example. You see here how, like, we have these I'm pointing to the screen, like, if you guys can see what I'm pointing to. You see how you have these different color boxes. These are all, like, it could be a table, but I'm willing to bet that they're actually all divs, and there they are. They're all just divs, right? And then a div property could have, like, so you can have, you know, you can style it to have different colors, different font sizes, different margins, like the spacing that goes around it. You see this little rounded corner that it has. It's very subtle, but it's there. That's the border radius. Like, if we were to increase this border radius, you see how it gets a lot more round. You see that? You know, so divs are a very easy and simple way to just kind of separate your information so that you can style them differently. And divs are used just about almost every website in the world today. You'll see divs. Divs are used for everything. Anytime you're separating something. I kind of skipped the div the first time. Okay, so tag attributes, we already talked about that. Style attribute, we talked about that. And then the script tag, right? So let me take a step back here. I kind of just want to briefly say, so this style tag, everything that goes inside your HTML style tags is CSS code. And I'm not going to get into CSS code today. We'll talk about that on the next lesson. And then everything that goes inside of script tags in HTML is JavaScript code. And again, we're not going to talk about JavaScript today. I wrote that wrong. We're going to talk about JavaScript in, I believe, the lesson after CSS, correct? So that's like a whole other thing, because they're all entirely their own things that should be thought of as their own things. And that kind of wraps up our introduction to HTML. I know that the information I've given you here today isn't like, oh, now you can go ahead and create an HTML website from scratch. Technically, you can. You know the fundamentals. You can open up a Notepad, or you can open up an IDE, and you can make a file that has HTML head and body. Like, remember those three: HTML, head, and body. Those are the three most important elements of any page, because you need them in order for your page to render properly. Everything that goes in the body is all the visual things that you're going to put into your page. For the sake of learning, head is not important. This is like really when you get into like search engine optimization. Obviously it's important for like the title, like the little icons that you see, like you see how like these tabs, there's like the little icon there that's called the fave icon that goes in the head. And anytime that you're referencing an external CSS file to like be the file to style this, right? Because although you can, so I guess it's worth talking about, although you can make a style tag, right? And you can put all your code within an HTML file, you want to try to keep like a separation of concern separate. You know, so instead of having your style in your HTML and having your JavaScript all into your HTML, it's better to use an external CSS file. You could call it style.css, and then just link that file. And I'll show you guys how to do that on the next session. You link your CSS file, and now everything you write on that separate file is styling this page, because this page is pulling the styling from that file. And it's the same thing with JavaScript. You might have code to do all kinds of different things with JavaScript, but you want to separate them into their own files. Like, so if you have a code that's meant to like pull data from somewhere, like pull like I think that on the last session we talked about like how weather channels use like AJAX requests to pull information, right? So if you have like a weather website that has a bunch of different widgets, you might want to have a different JavaScript file for each individual widget. So that way, like, so say for example we're working as a team and I need Brass to like fix something that's wrong with this widget. You don't want to have to go and change this enormous file and have to figure out where the widget code is. It's much easier if you have your site organized and you can literally go to your JavaScript folder and go to your widget.js file. You know that that's where that is, and then that's where your code's going to be. And it's just like, and again, that's all about organization, and it's more about working as a team and better practices and things like that. And everything that I teach you guys, I will do my best to make sure that I'm already teaching you the best practice ways of doing things, so that nobody's picking up any bad habits that are then kind of like frowned upon in the industry. Because what I hope you guys can get out of this is, best case scenario for me is you guys all become resourceful people that can help with my own projects. But you know, if you guys can like start working on your own projects that have nothing to do with me, I'd be glad that I've been able to make that happen. Or if you end up be able to get gigs and like get paid client work that you're working on other people's websites, that's fine too. I'm not looking for a commission. I'm not looking for a cut. I don't really care. I'm doing this. You guys know why I'm doing this. We already went over it. Hopefully we can all work on A-Buffs. I believe Ray-Buffs is like a retirement project for me if I'm able to pull it off. It's a pretty big one. But you know, we'll talk more about that stuff offline. I'm not gonna get into that on the lesson. But that kind of, so after every single lesson and every session that we do, I have a section in the end where I talk about practice suggestions. And this is important. This is important because the way we're doing these lessons, I'm not going to give you guys homework. I'm not going to quiz anybody. I'm not going, because you know, people learn at different paces and people learn at different levels. So in the end of the day, it's about, for you guys have to kind of question how serious you all really are about each of these things. And you between now and the next session, whenever that is, whether that's next week, whether it's over the weekend, that all depends on us. If you have the time, and I'm sure everybody can make the time if you want to kind of like practice this and like do what I've done here and like test it out. Write your own basic HTML file and test it out. All it takes, you can literally do it on Notepad. I'll show you what I mean. I can literally go to my desktop. You don't even need an IDE, so I don't want to hear the excuse, oh, I didn't do it because I couldn't set up my Netbeans, even though it doesn't take it. It's just a software you install, right? Oh my god, once I finally get through all these windows, I'll be able to show you the example. So on my Notepad here, I am literally, all I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to new, and we're going to create a text document. I'm going to call it notepad.html, and I'm going to open this, just assuming that you don't have an IDE installed. I'm going to literally just open this with Notepad, right? So here's a regular Notepad file. Everybody who uses a computer should know what a Notepad is, because that's what people use to just paste random shit into. So you could do the same thing that we just did. Open HTML. Remember, HTML head body, right? So HTML head. I'm using tabs for the indentation. One tab. That's how I do it. Body. And then you, in your head, you can give it a title if you want. You don't. I'm not going to, because you can see that you actually don't need that. And if you're not going to have a title or anything in your head, you don't need the head either. You don't need it. It's there if you're going to actually give some head information for the browser to read. I apologize about the noise in the background. We're almost done. But so here I'm just gonna say sample notepad web page. I'm gonna save this, and now the same way I'm gonna open Chrome, and I'm going to actually I could just open it with Chrome, right? So open with Google Chrome. There it is, sample notepad web page, and all my notepad is the code that we just went over. If you look at your source, or if you look at your browser inspector, that's all I wrote. Your HTML, your head, your body. There it is. And notice that the browser put that head in automatically for me. I'm pretty sure I didn't include that in the file. Some browsers will do that, others won't. I think maybe all of them do nowadays. I don't know. I haven't written the page without header information in a long time. But basically what I'm trying to say is I am not going to, back to what I was trying to get at, right? I'm not going to quiz anybody on anything. In the end of the day, it's like the more we move further along, the less you picked up between sessions, the harder time you're going to have understanding new concepts as we go along. And if you get to a point that you're like finding it like almost impossible to keep up, you know, that's kind of on you, but hopefully like you have the videos that we're recording. So this stuff is not only available on Twitch. I think Twitch removes VODs after 30 days. We're also going to have this stuff on YouTube. I already uploaded I exported straight to YouTube, and the YouTube channel is just called Dynamic Fix. So you can get it there as well. So that's not going anywhere. The real test is going to be once we get to the very, very, very like end of all of this, and we're actually going into A buffs, and I'm actually starting to assign tickets, right? Like, if, for example, right, so this is like maybe 3 months, maybe more, I don't know, it really depends on how long it takes for us to get there. So say I assign Scopes a ticket, and Scopes is asking me like, can you explain to me like what HTML element is or what these attributes are? You know, at that point, you know, obviously, like what I'm going to say is like, well, you can go back and watch the videos, because at that point I can't really help you if you were not able to pick up like the basic fundamentals that we're going over like literally today, and it's the first lesson, and you're not able to retain that information. Then like there's really like I'm just assuming that you're not that invested, and if you're not that invested, once we get to a point that you're actually getting tickets, it's going to feel very, very overwhelming, and you're not going to be able to do anything. Now, what I expect is, obviously, I don't expect people to, like, get a ticket and just grab it and knock it out of the park, either. Of course not. You know, I expect you guys to have questions. I expect a lot of back and forth on how we're going to do something. I expect questions, and I do expect to repeat myself. I don't expect you guys to never ask me a question if it's something I already covered in a video. Of course not. You know, but, you know, you can keep those questions to a minimum by making sure that you're fully understanding the concepts that we're going over. You know, because unfortunately, you're going to see, especially if you're looking up tutorials, or you're looking at examples, different people do use different terminologies for things. Like, for example, we're talking about this is an element. This is an element, and then like, you know, if I go to like body type, you know, this is an attribute, right? Some people will say that this is a property, and that is actually wrong. In HTML, it is called an attribute anywhere in the like officially, that's what it's called. It's called an attribute. But if somebody is saying a property of an element, it's not completely incorrect, you know, because that thinking comes from other languages. In JavaScript, like we're gonna, like when we're looking at a JavaScript variable or JavaScript object, the keyword that we're supposed to use is properties. Likewise, if you on JavaScript you're referring to something as a JavaScript attribute, you know, I'll know what you're talking about. Most people will know what you're talking about. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is it might get confusing with information you get from other sources if you're like trying to like follow a tutorial somewhere or whatever, and somebody is telling you, oh, this is the HTML property, you'll be like, what the fuck is he talking about? Or a CSS property. So there's going to be different names. I don't want to list every single name, but if you so if things like that come up, just refer to ask, like, what is this? What is a property in HTML? And I'm like, oh, that's an attribute, and then you'll know exactly what that means right off the bat, right? So I'll try my best to stick to the proper lingo that you're supposed to use, and it's a little difficult. I have to look some of these things up myself because I don't speak code. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something that, like, when I'm coding, I'm not thinking, oh, what is this called? What is that called? But in order to teach you guys and explain things, it is important for me to make sure that I'm calling it the right thing. So anytime that I have any doubts, I will always make sure that I'm looking it up to give you guys the correct terminology for whatever language or whatever it is that we're doing. But anyway, so to wrap this up, practice suggested for HTML. The only thing that I could think of as far as HTML practice goes is take a few minutes of your time between this session and the next session to look at like a list of different elements that JavaScript has. Don't overdo it though. Don't like start trying to understand what every single element does. There are tons of elements, but I'll give you a list of the ones that matter, and the ones that off the top of my head is things that I would use in everyday use, right? So you have your HTML obviously, and your head and your body. That's obvious. And then you have your div, which is exactly what I showed you guys, just a container. You have your P. P means paragraph, and all it is like it's going to be like if you're reading like a piece of text, a P will automatically like break the line between.
Your Discord showing crypto.
Say that again?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Your
Discord
Discord
showing crypto.
Oh, my Discord is showing crypto. What?
Yeah, but it's showing you Kraken.
My Discord? Are you talking about?
Yeah, your stream. There you go.
Oh.
Crypto.
That's weird. I mean, Twitch
Okay,
isn't.
Now, go back to your notepad, because I have a question.
Hold on one second. So you guys can see it now, or?
I can see your stream now. Yeah, you just had your Chrome browser
now
at
we
the top.
can see it.
Okay, that's strange. But you see it fine on both the stream and the.
On the Twitch, it's been everything you've been trying to
Yeah,
show
the
us.
Twitch was fine. It was just the Discord.
Oh, okay. Well, that's weird because Discord is supposed to be sharing the same screen that's pulling information from. But whatever. That's never happened before. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so John, okay, Notepad. What was your question?
All right, open notepad.
It's open. Do you see it?
Where'd your head go? You have your body, or is your head your body? Because I see HTML.
Okay, so I'll explain. So you need a head, and I'll put it back. You need a head for when you are going to actually have like header information, like if you want to have a title, right? But if you don't put a title, like say you don't want to put a title, I'm going to leave the head there anyway. Say you don't want to put a title on your page. What's going to happen is your browser will render it like, so here it just says notepad.html, right? Your browser will probably just use the name of the file. I might say, I think Firefox will say untitled document. It's important. Different browsers handles these things differently. If you have a title, then all the browser will just say whatever you put in the title. So if I do title sample here, notice there it says sample now. Or if I say title abuffs, if this is like the abuffs webpage, then you have abuffs over there, right? So that's what the title is. But if you're not going to have a title, there's also no point in having an empty head. You can just get rid of it.
That was my question, was that if there is no title, is it even worth putting a header in?
Right, it's not. Like, so you don't want empty tags unless, of course, it's there for a reason. Like, so say, for example, I can put an empty div here, right? I'm going to put an empty div here before my sample notepad page. And it doesn't do anything at all. So there's no point in having an empty div there unless I want to style this div and make it so it's like a box, right? I'm just gonna make it like a green box, height 10 px. So now my div, although all I've done here is add the style attribute and add some CSS code to create this green box that you see here, right? But my div is still empty. right? But there's a reason for it to be here empty. I don't want anything inside of my green box. I just want a green box. So in that case, it's okay to have a div because the div is technically doing something visually, But if you weren't going to style that div at all, then you don't need an empty div tag, right?
Okay.
Now, your HTML tag is not empty because this is inside of it, right? And your head is empty because there's nothing. Body and head, notice they are not inside of each other. They are basically nested within HTML. So head goes first and then body. So the easy way to look at that is you're just looking at the indentation. They all start in the same line, which means that they're all like next to each other on the same level rather than like inside of each other. Now, if I were to put my body here, like now I nested my body inside of my head, which is incorrect and like nothing's gonna happen. Like, it shouldn't. Like, so now here what's happening is Chrome is doing some work for me, and it's assuming that I meant to put my body over here, even though I did not do it correctly. I hate that about browsers, but I get why they do it. Like it's obviously not how I coded it. I coded it wrong, but Chrome is like, yeah, this is what he meant. You know what I mean? But if you actually go ahead and look at the source, it's incorrect. It's what I wrote. So like when you look at elements, this is how the browser has rendered it / corrected it. If you look at source, this is like the raw data that is pulling from your file. If that makes sense. Now, with that said, and I know this was, you guys also got to understand that forgive me for the fact that sometimes I'll brush over certain things that may be complicated and doesn't feel like it should be complicated to me. Obviously, sometimes it's a little difficult for me to judge what's complicated and what's not because of how long I've been doing this. I'll try my best to break everything down as much as I can. But the main thing to understand. I think I finished listing. Oh, I didn't. So you have your body, your div, your p, your table. This is basically like the fundamentals of HTML right here. These tags. There are obviously a whole lot more. There's probably a couple that I'm not thinking about that I use a lot. Oh, your anchor tag. So let's talk about two things here that I didn't talk about. My bad. So I'll actually go ahead and use my notepad to describe what this is. And for Nora, I'll do this. Font size 48. There you go. I think that's a little exaggerated, but you get the point. Right. So let's talk about some of the elements that I didn't talk about. So you can have a button. A button is its own element, and if you put text inside of your button element, now you have a button with text inside of it. And this is how your browser renders the button. And it's a clickable button. The button doesn't do anything, but the button's there. How to make that button do stuff? We'll talk about that when we get to JavaScript and how to target HTML elements and all that. Not something we're going to focus on today. But so that's your button tag. But you also have your anchor tag. And there's a huge difference between the two. A button is actually a visual button. An anchor tag is a little different. An anchor tag is basically just a hyperlink on whatever text that you wrote. Now, this hyperlink doesn't work because it has no destination. You give the link a destination with an href property. I'm not, off the top of my head, I don't even know what href means. I'm just used to it. I'm assuming it's like something reference or whatever. But like we're going to say https or https www.google.com. And I'm going to save and I'm going to refresh. Now my text is a link that I can click on, and if I click on it, it takes me to google.com. The link will take you wherever you tell it to go to. If you add a target property and you say blank, and I don't expect you guys to memorize this. This is one of those things that like, what I want you to focus on is you understand that this is the element, this is the attribute, these are the values, right? That's all I want to make sure you guys understand today. We're going to go over, like, don't think that you have to figure out the rest on your own. We're going to go over these things a lot. So, like, when on the CSS lesson, we're gonna go over and how to style different tags and all that stuff. So you don't feel like, oh, I've given you just this and you have to go and look up what every element means. We'll cover them. It's just I don't want to focus on them because they're not important and they're gonna kind of come with time. So like in the future, if you see me put down a tag that you've never seen before, like you see me write UL, you might not know what it means, and I'm not going to show you new things without explaining it, but regardless of what it is, you understand that's an HTML element, right? That's the main thing that I want to get out of this. As long as you understand that's what it is. But anyway, if with the target blank, which is a different property, it'll open Google on a new tab. So like, well, I should have. I didn't. I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? I can't see because my camera. I can't even press DX because my camera's on top of it. Maybe I didn't like save properly. Target blank. Save. Try again. That's not working. I'm doing something wrong there. Pretty sure it's target blank. I could be wrong. Let me look it up real quick. Anchor tag target. HTML target attribute. It is blank. I don't know why it's not working. Probably because I know. It's probably because of this. It's probably because it's all fucked and it's like not properly structured. I don't know why that would make target ref not work. I'm just gonna try this, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. I'm not worried about it now. It's not important, but that's what it is, right? So, anyways, you guys get the point. This is the structure of HTML and everything, and that's all HTML is. HTML is just a list of tags. HTML, the tags can have properties. Oh, okay, so one last thing that I forgot to mention. I think it's a good way to close it off. So a div needs to close. Not every single HTML element needs to close, and it's actually very few. There are some special elements that do not need to close, and off the top of my head, the first one I can think of and the obvious one that you'll see a lot is image. So when you're adding an image to a document, let me go back to some HTML code here so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. So when you're adding an image to a document, we'll go here. Okay, so here we're gonna do an image tag, and just to keep things simple, I'll indent it again. So an image tag is not going to actually have a /image because you can't really put anything inside of an image. Like if you want to have an image as a background, that's a whole other thing. You can set your image as the background image for a div with CSS, and then have the stuff inside of your div. But if you want an image in your file, right? And I don't think that this is gonna show me anything here. But let's just go to Google Images real quick and just grab a random image from the internet. We'll look for I don't know, SpongeBob or something. I don't know, anything. It doesn't matter. Where's my okay? So we'll use this image here. Now, when you're pointing to an image from the internet, you need the image address. So this is the full image address, and this gives me. So this is the PNG file right here. Now, it's kind of complicated, how this works for some websites nowadays, especially when you're pulling. So this is not a direct PNG file, but this is the ultimate link. Usually an image is going to end in .jpeg, .png, .gif, etc. But because the server is rendering an image file from this, you know what? Just so I don't make this more confusing than it has to be, let me find an actual image that actually is an actual image. And it's not being, so this is a .jpeg, right? So this is the internet URL to go to this image directly. So if you want to put this image on your page, it's an image element with a source attribute, and the value of the source attribute is your image URL. And now you can go and load that into your page. Now your image is on your page, and you can style that image in all kinds of ways, but so I can put a CSS style over here and say, I want that
And you make SpongeBob green.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that's Photoshop. It doesn't work quite like that. So the things that you can do with CSS really is just like you can tell every image. Now notice, by saying image, I'm saying every single image in this document. You know, if I want to just, we're going to get into this in the future though, but because there's only one image on this document, it doesn't matter. But like say I want the height to be 100 pixels, then I don't assign the width, just the height. By default, my browser will take that height property and it'll resize the height to 100 pixels. So if you go here and like if you actually look at this image, now I have this height 100 pixel settings, and you can actually go ahead and if I adjust the code here, you can see you can set the height to whatever you want it to go. Does that make sense? You know, so this is CSS, and we'll get into CSS next time, but that is how. So image is one of the very few HTML elements that will not have a close. There are some others, and I'm gonna be honest, I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I know that there are others. But image is the most commonly used one, the ones that you'll see that you don't need to close the image. So it's like an exception to keep in mind. And obviously images are commonly used in web development, so you'll see, I mean, obviously, so you'll see images everywhere as we go about doing things, and you just got to remember that the image one does not need a close tag. And then to kind of talk a little bit about what Scopes was saying, back in the day, you used to have to do this to like, so this was, and I'm going to remove the source here just to kind of like make it easier for you guys to see what's going on. I'm going to actually remove the source. I'm going to leave some of this. I'll just do ... Obviously this is not going to work now because the link is not a real link. But so this is the image tag. You used to have to do this to close tags that don't need like a closing tag. But ever since HTML5, this has become redundant, and you don't need it. Actually, Netbeans is telling me right now, you don't really need this at all. You know, and there's other things you can do, like so images you can do an alt, where like here I could call it SpongeBob, and what an alt will do is if for whatever reason your image doesn't load, it'll like place that as a placeholder where the image is supposed to be. So that's what an alt is. It's like an alternative text to show instead of the image. You know, and notice that it's basically 100 by 100. So if I had given this like a width as well, then the box that's being taken by that image will also take that height. You know, so then if I were to fix that, that image will be stretched to be exactly this size, if that makes sense. One more thing to understand here about how HTML references files, and this, I think this is the last core thing that I didn't put it in my notes because I didn't think about it until now, and I do apologize about that. So we reference this image directly from the internet. Now what happens if this image exists in our document, right? So I have this demo.html. Well, let's go ahead and I'm going to use this one here, the one that's on my desktop, because that'll be easier to explain. So say I have the image file.
1 second, Noah's Discord broke.
Okay, I'll wait. I'll actually go ahead and save a file while I wait. I'm just going to basically...
Cool. While you're waiting, I have another question you're probably going to get into.
Go ahead.
With the way you were adjusting the image, being that you just did the height and you didn't touch the width, will it scale the width with the height unless you touch the width?
It'll scale the width with the height by default with 1 in I believe every browser now. I know Internet Explorer didn't once upon a time. Nobody uses Internet Explorer anymore. But yeah, like you most often than not you can get away with just doing one of them, and it'll automatically like scale the other to be proportional to whatever like the width size is. So you won't lose.
Get taller instead of like how it was scaling with it.
I'll kind of go over that right here, and I'll show you. Like we'll kind of look at it with an example, right? What was your question, by the way, Scopes? Before I
when I'm using that button thing, and then I want to use href, do I have to do button then href?
No. So an HTML button does not work like an anchor tag at all. It's completely different. Like, so you if you want to make your button do something, you do need JavaScript. There is no workaround. The
So I
only
can't make a button using href.
you can. It's just about how you style it. You can actually style an href to look like a standard button, and you can style a standard button to just look like normal text. And we'll go over that actually on the next lesson. That's one of the things that I'm going to go over. Like CSS can make anything look like anything. So in the end of the day, your HTML tags and how they're like styled by default is actually irrelevant because you can override everything with CSS, and we'll go over that in more detail on the next one. But like to kind of go back to the image. So if you have your image in the same exact location as your HTML file, so like my HTML file is this demo.html, or it's the it's the demo.html. Notice I have this elon.jpg. If you do image source, you don't need like, if it's in the same place, then all you need to do is just say elon.jpg, and here I go going against what I said, double quotes for HTML, right? That's what you want to get used to. And now if I save this and load my this is still, oh, this is the wrong one, hold on, I gotta like, I'm just gonna come here and say that again. Did he say he'll be right back? I think that's what I heard.
Something about real quick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so demo is not the one we're trying to open. Let me delete that. Notepad is the one we're trying to open. But we've gone over this. So I'm going to just kind of keep going just for the sake of... So this image is being loaded because I did not give it like a width or a height or anything like that. The image will load with its default size, like however the image is saved. Like when you open it on your computer, whatever the default size of that image is the image that it'll be loaded with. That's all. You almost never do that in HTML, you know, because usually there's like some kind of design standard that you're trying to follow. So the image needs to kind of like fit inside of a box, or it needs to be like a certain width or a certain height. So if you give it a height, and again, do not use, you know what, I'm not even going to do it that way. I was going to just do an HTML attribute for the height, but I'm going to just not be lazy about it, and I'm actually going to do CSS because I don't want you guys to ever use that because it's just not what you should ever do. So I'm going to do a style tag, and I'm going to style my image, right? So just to kind of get back to like what John was asking, so if I'm going to do image, I hate how like the tabs on it on Notepad is like ridiculously large, right? Yeah, that's, but so now my image, I'm gonna say width 100 pixels. Okay, so if all I changed was the width, so it'll automatically scale the height so that it's not making this image like stretch out of proportion or anything like that. Now the original height of this image is that's not how I look at that. How do I look at image info? See, this is why I like Firefox better. Firefox, I can actually look at information on the image. Apparently I can't do that with Chrome, but I know I can do it here. So the original height of this image is 600 pixels, right? So if I make the height 600, if the browser didn't automatically scale that properly for me, then it will look like that. It'll stretch the hell out of it. And with HTML, if you want to stretch an image on purpose, like I can't think of a good reason to do that, honestly, unless it's like a solid color, you don't ever want to like misconstrue proportions. Like you want, like, so usually you always want to like scale 1, or you want to use a different property, which I'm not going to get into right now because I don't want to confuse anybody. But just scaling either or, you know, so like if I go back and I scale just the height to like, I don't know, 1,000 pixels, it'll automatically scale the width accordingly to keep it proportional, to keep the constraints of that image the way it's supposed to be. You want to see my hair? I mean, it's whatever's left of it, it's there. I mean, I'm not gonna take off my hat if that's what you're asking me to do. That's not, you guys are not ready for that yet. But anyway, I think that kind of covers it. Was there any more questions?
Hey, why did Brass call me dumb? I just saw that. It's totally unrelated.
Wait, what? Where did he say that?
Bress called me dumb in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Okay, I see.
I had my notepad taking notes over that the whole time, and I just moved and I saw Nora is dumb.
Brett has been toxic today. I don't know why.
I do have like a legitimate question. Now, what
Okay,
if you
go ahead.
didn't want it to load in the top left corner of the screen? What if you want it to be centered? Is that like something that's too complicated at this point?
No, I mean, like, that's literally something we'll go over in next lesson because it's all CSS,
Okay.
right? But I just
Okay.
because you asked, I'll quickly show you. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to align this image. If you wanted this image to be centered, like, you can make it so everything in your document is centered by saying, like, body. So, again, body, now I'm styling the actual body, which is, like, everything, like, the whole area of the page, right? So if you're styling the body, you know, you can say text align, and I know it's not a text, but it kind of counts as one. You say text align center, it'll move your image to the center of the page. But that's just CSS styling. Now let's just say you didn't want that. Let's just say you actually wanted to put your image very specifically. I'm going to make it a little smaller, right? So you wanted your image to be in a very specific spot on the web page. So you can actually use position absolute or fixed, like, you know, but there's a difference between the two. I'm just going to show you absolute for now, and we'll talk more about that in the future. But so position absolute, like right now it made no difference, but position absolute allows you to actually change. You can either adjust the image from the top, the left, the right, or the bottom. So like, say I wanted to move it like from the top and from the left, I wanted to move it over to the right and over down, right? So I can say top is 20 pixels and left is 100 pixels, right? So now this image is going to move like that. And now I can actually go into anytime that you're styling like this, and you like, instead of trying to just play the guessing game where you're typing it, saving it, refreshing, just go ahead and crank out the inspector tools, inspect it, and you're going to see the style populate here. And then you can figure out what numbers you actually want by just, you can literally click and then hold your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard. And I'm actually going to go down. You see that even a negative number works here. Like now I'm pushing it off screen by using a negative number. So if you want to just Elon's mouth to be like on the very top of the screen, but then we wanted to kind of like move it more to the right, you can do that. Now, say you wanted it to be like, say you want it all the way on the right side of the screen. Instead of doing left and like going all the way to the side of the screen, now obviously, like, so say I'm going to do like 1,000 pixels or 1,900 pixels. Right now it's all the way on the right side of the screen. The problem with this is if I resize my window, it's gone because it's like 1,900 pixels off to the left. It's off screen now, right? But so if you want it to always be on the right side of the screen, that's when instead of using left, you will use right instead. And if I do 0, it starts on the right side of the screen. And it'll adjust from, regardless of how big your window is, it'll come from the right side of the screen. And again, that's all of this is just CSS. And CSS is very powerful, obviously, and that's how you can like make your pages look the way you want them to look. And again, we'll go over CSS in more detail on the next lesson. But as far as HTML goes, is there anything confusing at all? And let's go back to Netbeans. We won't be looking at Notepad anymore because there's no reason to. I closed the file. I deleted the file. Oh, great.
So if I'm downloading Netbeans and I get 112.3 bin Windows x64, that's the right one.
I don't. It's been a long time since I installed Netbeans. I think so.
See, it's just the extension.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like-
Download the latest version, and I would say just install everything with the default settings. Now, if you guys don't have Java installed on your computer, it might actually install that as well. It's not a big deal because it runs on Java. It's built on Java. I hate Java, but Netbeans is great.
I ain't being toxic today. I don't appreciate that.
I was waiting for you to say something about that
Stone,
comment.
does your camera move?
Well, I'm watching the stream, so everything's super delayed.
Say that again, John.
Hey Stone, does your camera move?
Yes.
Prove it.
What do you mean?
Turn it all the way to your right.
What?
He's just trying to see my room for some reason. That's kind
I
of weird.
just assumed that's where Flo is sitting, and I want.
No, she's not here. She's not in the room.
Can you
She's
check
in
your
the living
Discord
room.
message, Stone?
Oh my god, secret messages now?
What a
No, no.
free-
You sent me some HTML. I like chicken nuggets.
Open it.
Oh, okay. So he's just messing around with HTML. See, that's good.
No, you have to open it.
Oh, you want me to actually open the file?
Yep.
Press.
Hey,
Let us
John.
all see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys get to see Scopes' little HTML file that he's created.
Hey John, look in the Twitch chat.
I was
Easy
waiting
keylogger.
for something like that. Okay, let me desktop my project. So this is Scopes' project,
Yeah,
everybody.
you can just open it in Chrome, you know. Yes. There's a
There you
button.
go. Free premium porn, and it goes to YouTube. It's a Rickroll button. I'm 100% sure. Let's see.
You
Your
motherfucker.
mattress shouldn't buckle under
Yep,
pressure.
Rickroll.
Theirs
Yep.
does. Tempur-Pedic
How many
doesn't.
times have I seen that shit?
So close. You cheated.
I cheated.
You hovered over it. You
I
cheated.
didn't know what it was. I mean, I know it was
How do I
YouTube.
disable preview features? I don't want you to be able to
You
preview that
can't.
shit.
Like that's a browser thing. You can't.
Fuck.
That's a security thing. You can't make it so it doesn't show where it's gonna go. That's like
That's correct. Anti-rickroll. Call
Yeah,
it out
didn't
before it
work.
happened.
didn't work. But yeah, so this is I guess this was Scopes messing around with HTML. So this is what I would expect. Like, do take the time, please do take the time to just kind of mess around. If you want to look at his code, that's basically what his code is. So he had a head, he put a title. The title is I like chicken nugget, and as you can see here, here's the title, I like chicken nuggets. You know, and then he did href for free premium porn in the body. Now his indentation is off. You know, you notice how he starts this line aligned with body. This is inside of body, so this should be like indented here. This href should be indented on the same line as the table. And then you have his free premium porn button. He put his button inside href. Okay, and then he did a table. He did some styling there. I'm not sure where he got that from. I guess he was just messing around with CSS or whatever. And then he has 2 rows, each of them has 4 columns, and which is what you see here. And he used, this is the coding that kind of spaces it all out and gives the background color, border color, all the shit that you see here. All comes from this little snippet of code here, which could have been done in CSS. And if you were to now showing, let me copy and paste this real quick because I just want to kind of show something. So this is like one of the importances of like why like having CSS separate and not using the style tag per se is better, because if you wanted to like actually understand what this says and edit this, it's kind of difficult to do it like this. But if you have everything like in a CSS file or within a style tag, now you could kind of break apart. So his background color is carded blue, his width is 800, his height is 1000, his border radius is 50, his border style is dashed, and these are all CSS properties that he just probably like uses
Yeah, I
IDE
just typed
to
something
figure
in
out.
and just
Yeah,
tapped it.
so he was just playing with it, and then this would be indented
Go,
like
but
this.
you're not the
This
teacher,
would be
shut up.
indented like that.
Sorry.
And and like, but as you can see now, this is like a much clearer way to read the same exact thing. And if I were to save this, I saved it over my notepad.html. So if I come here to my notepad.html and open that with Chrome, it's literally the same thing, only it's not working because I did so this style is supposed to go to this table, right? So we're gonna say table, so the table style should be that, not everything, right? And now we can get rid of this style tag. It doesn't need
That's
it
where I was
anymore.
confused, because I thought to myself, like, if I put the style
So there it is.
outside of the text, I didn't know how it was going to, like, reference the table.
Yeah, so like the reference. Now, the one thing to note though is like, let me copy this table and paste it like down here, right? And this is I'm gonna just go over it now very quickly. I don't want to like sidetrack too much. So I have 2 tables, and it's gonna actually style both tables because it's actually gonna style every single table that exists in this document the same way. So how do I make it only style the first one? Well, there's a couple of different ways. The most obvious ways, you can say ID, and let's just call this scopes, right? So the idea of this table is scopes. This is a property that we just assigned, and now we can actually reference this table by ID like that. So table scopes is the one that should be styled like that, and then the one on the bottom has no style. So it's just like there. See? So we only style one of them. And then if we wanted to, like, say we wanted to make this one ID Nora and refresh, nothing happens because there's no styling for Nora. But if I change this to Nora instead, now it's going to target that Nora table, not the top one. So here's the top one, no style, and there's the Nora table with all that style. And that's how referencing works. But we'll talk more about that and I'll explain it in more detail on the CSS lesson that we go over next time. But that's about it. That wraps it up. I'm gonna switch to my shitty template here. So this Dynamic Fix background was the old YouTube outro for the Dynamic Fix channel a really, really long time ago. There's a Dynamic Fix channel, might as well use it, right? So that wraps up today's lesson. We'll talk offline about like when we'll do the next one. I'm not gonna do that on stream. But as I wrap it up here real quick, we actually went well over the hour on this one. I do apologize. I looked at the time and realized when we were getting closer to wrapping up the hour, but like you guys asked a lot of good questions, and a lot of the good, it's a good thing that none of the questions were specifically about HTML. I think most of the questions were like things you can do to HTML. So even already after this first lesson, you guys are already thinking beyond HTML markup, which is good because HTML is very basic. And if you guys are not asking anything at all about the HTML structure, then I take that as you guys understand the HTML structure pretty well. Obviously, it doesn't make you guys HTML professionals, but you understand the structure well enough to like not really have any confusion or any questions about what you can do with it, right? So that wraps it up. This video, again, will be on YouTube. I don't know how long it takes for it to disappear from Twitch. So if you're ever like wanting to go back to this, YouTube is your best bet. Dynamic Fix is a channel. And thank you guys very much for the time, as always. And hopefully we can keep this going. But that's it. Wrapping up, ending the stream.